Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here. Now that my two obligatory informative videos are done for the day, it's time to talk about current events in the online fitness community. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this Dallas McCarver situation further. And what I thought was interesting are some of the people in my comments, as well as people in my social media, like on my private Facebook and things like that, where most of the people there are people I know, I've met in person. So there are people I know. People I know I've had real conversations with who were jumping up upset that people were blaming this on anabolics or anything like that. They were blaming it on PEDs, it being a role, and they're like, no, no, no. And how many people actually jumped up and said, well, yeah, I mean, anyone could choke on their food. And people are just in absolute denial of reality here. Completely detached from the reality of the situation, and it's because of their own lifestyle choices and their own cognitive dissonance here. And this is something that we need to take seriously in this community. Now, that being said, I want to touch on something else for a moment, because some people are like, wow, I mean, you called it and you're right, but some people are like, well, you might seem to be gloating, you seem to be happy about this news. Let me make this perfectly clear. I don't take any joy in someone like Dallas McCarver dying due to self-inflicted harm. The reason I say that, I didn't see any indications out there that he was a bad person. He's never wronged me. He's never wronged any of my loved ones. In fact, when I looked around online, I didn't really see any stories from other people about him wronging them. I didn't read a single asshole story about him being an asshole to anyone. That kind of says something too, because most of us out there, you look around long enough, you can find people who are talking crap about him. I mean, we have examples of even a lot of these YouTubers being dicks to people, and it being caught on camera or stories being told. I couldn't find any about this guy. Maybe they're out there, but I sure didn't see them. So, am I happy about being right when it comes to someone who was probably a legitimately decent person? No. I don't take any joy in that. Now, are there other people out there in this community who I might, if I think about it right now, might I take a little joy in their own demise by their own hand if they happen to do it or something bad happens to them? Probably. But I'm thinking that now. However, I could also see in some of those situations maybe feeling bad for their loved ones. If it actually goes down and go, well, they might have been a dick, but, they have children or brothers or sisters or parents, and they probably care about them. So, I don't want to be overly happy about that because someone else is suffering as a result of it. It's one thing when it's self-inflicted harm on yourself, but oftentimes that leads to innocent people suffering too, suffering because they loved you or cared about you and you did it to yourself. So even in those cases of the people who I might see it as good news, I still would probably feel bad for their loved ones. I would still feel bad for their loved ones haven't necessarily been dicks to people. They don't deserve to be hurting. So that caveat aside there, here's the reality of the situation. People are saying, well, anyone could choke. No, actually they don't. They don't. Choking is very rare among healthy adult males. Young men who exercise and are in good shape choke mind-bogglingly rarely. It's like being struck by lightning. Not saying it doesn't happen, but people also get struck by lightning. People also win the lottery. It's very, very rare. In fact, over half of all choking deaths are by people over the age of 74. All right? Over half. In other words, the majority are very elderly people. That's who chokes to death. Small children, toddlers, babies. That's your next biggest demographic. Well, what else is there? We're talking about something like 90-95% of choking deaths. Almost most of the rest, with a few odd exceptions, tend to be drug-related. Usually drug-related, the next one behind that. Well, here's what went down. You have a person who, the news stories now are talking about insulin, and I did call that. There is some evidence out there in the news that insulin was involved. Some news stories are reporting on that. And it's also been stated that there are people who knew him who said he was doing 30 units of Humalog before every meal. Now, you're going to tell me this wasn't a factor? Let's keep in mind the fact that he's over 300 pounds, which is again only due to massive doses of anabolics, is also a factor in running out of oxygen and even passing out with food in your mouth. Let's be honest here. Who's got more receptors in their body for insulin? Someone who's 300 plus pounds of muscle or someone who's 160 pounds? Let's be honest. He's got a lot more receptors for insulin. He's going to see a lot bigger shift in blood sugar. Got a lot more sponges to soak it up. Again, the other factors, airway issues, everything else due to being that big. The anabolics play a role there, and the problem is that this was cumulative overall lifestyle. It's combinations of his entire lifestyle, because what looks like very well may have happened, and we'll get the coroner's report, but what may have happened was that a very massive guy who was big from using lots of anabolics is eating tons of food and then injecting insulin. Used too much insulin, started going hypoglycemic. Now normally when that happens, what do most bodybuilders and other people do? They get a bunch of sugar. But in this case, he was found with a bunch of food in his mouth. It might have been the case that the guy tried to push a bunch of extra food and rice and chicken and whatever down his own throat because he was feeling hypoglycemic from his insulin, trying to get more carbs in his system to get his blood sugar back up. Black out in the middle of it, and then you've got a combination. The insulin can kill you at that point. All right, choking can kill you at that point. Even if that's how it went down, you have to have an autopsy to determine which of the two was the actual direct cause of death, or if one of them killed him and then the other one would have killed him 5 minutes later had he survived it. But you're dealing with a combination of things there to where in the combination either one of them is potentially deadly. Blacking out with food in your throat, inhaling it in your esophagus, that could choke you to death. The insulin itself could produce the exact same effects. Going hypoglycemic from too much insulin and not enough blood sugar can kill you and knock you unconscious, put you in a coma, start shutting down organs. So in this scenario, which seems to be the direction the news media seems to be discussing and reporting, and it's a very plausible scenario, particularly the amount of size he had to assume he's using huge amounts of insulin, is not only logical, it's probable. Biologically speaking, it's almost a probability. Almost a probability. So when you factor in that his muscle mass pretty much requires him to have been doing that, as a biological requirement, it's not a far-fetched story, is it? And you got other people saying specifically that is what he was doing. That it makes perfect sense. That's very, very reasonable to assume. In fact, the odds of that being wrong are pretty slim. Just from a biology and an anabolic perspective, pretty slim chance that he wasn't doing that. Almost impossible. So that's what he was doing. And it doesn't take much to figure that out. You could look at him and should be able to know that if you know things about muscle growth and size limits and drugs. You should be able to figure that out. That's pretty much the case. So, does that? Doesn't treat it appropriately? Kills him. Drops him dead from either choking or hypoglycemia, going into a diabetic coma. One of the two killed him, or the combination. That was lifestyle, guys. That was lifestyle. And here's the thing. Why are we in this community so in denial about this? And a lot of it comes because we know that the media and politicians have overhyped the risk of anabolics. We know that. That's plenty of medical doctors who work around them and with them agree with that point. They've been the risk have been overhyped. But let's be realistic here. Is moderate use the most healthy thing in the world? That's like saying we know that moderate alcohol use isn't particularly bad for you. Might even have some health benefits in some cases. Same with anabolics. But does it carry at least a small degree of risk? Of course it does. And so do moderate use of anabolics does carry at least a small amount of additional risk that would not be there if you didn't use them. It wouldn't be there if you didn't use them. There is a risk with it. Now, most of us understand in this community that that risk is lower than it's been made out to be. But the risk of abuse, guys carrying that sort of size, guys who use even rich piana doses, those risks are enormous. In fact, statistically speaking, the fact that Rich Piana even made it to 46 actually shows that he probably has pretty good genetics for resisting side effects. I'd say that puts him above average. I'm surprised he made it to 46. Now we come back and see this kid, Dallas, 26. And that needs to cue people in as to this community and what goes on here. This is what happens when you push your body beyond its limits. And people can say, well, if he hadn't a choker this one incident, he'd still be alive. Really? Because he passed out before in a competition that wasn't related to food down his throat. You're telling me this particular kid wasn't a ticking time bomb waiting to happen? We already saw the risk back then of saying this guy's not going to be around in 5 years. I said it back then. This guy's not going to be around in 5 years. And that's not said with malice. I didn't dislike him. But it's, you see that cycle of self-destruction. And it's sad to see, because that's the whole point. This whole community is supposed to be about building your bodies and building your soul. This is body destruction. And everyone wants to uplift it as a positive thing. It's body destruction. Look at the health effects that we're seeing. Look how many of these people are dying having health problems. We just lost one at 26. And there's going to be a bunch more to follow. You start looking at some of the people's health changes. There are even YouTubers, and I'm not going to go into names. There are YouTubers who've been involved in this hardcore bodybuilding lifestyle. You start looking at their faces. Look at what's going on with them. They're not as healthy as they're pretending to be. And there's more than one. That polydrug abuse catches up with you. It catches up with you, and you're starting to see it on some of them. More of these guys are going to be dropping dead. More of these pro bodybuilders are going to be dropping dead. You know why these bodybuilders are dropping dead? Because you had Ronnie Coleman, who was a Mr. Olympia and was a genetic freak. Ronnie Coleman was probably, in terms of muscle mass, strength, size, everything else, probably the single most genetically gifted person I have ever met in my life. And yes, I have met him in person years ago. I have seen him train when he was in his prime. And that is someone who is extremely mind-bogglingly genetically gifted. These other pro bodybuilders, even in the pros or at the Olympia, are not as genetically gifted as he was. And a lot of them are trying to play catch-up. They don't have the gifts. And I'm not saying he didn't go hard in the drugs and take a risk, because his health is pretty bad right now too, isn't it? Ronnie's falling apart. Look into that. But these guys are trying to catch him. They're trying to catch him. And what do you think that entails? Chemical warfare. A lot of these guys are probably using more than he was trying to catch him, because he set a new standard for that community. A whole lot of these guys are going to be dropping dead. Dallas is the first of many. And he's a young kid. About some of these other guys are getting up in their 30s who've been doing this and chasing Ronnie for a while. They're going to start dropping dead. Then what? Then are we going to lift this community up as anything but a death cult? And everyone's in denial. They're in denial. These drugs had nothing to do with it. Are you sure about that? You absolutely sure about that? Because I'm sorry if you don't believe that was a massive factor and that he would have just choked to death if he hadn't been abusing enormous mind-boggling amounts of drugs. You are in denial about the reality of this situation and the denial of this community. And I'm not saying the media hasn't overhyped the risk, but when you start abusing any drug, or you start abusing multiple drugs of any type, I don't care what they are. I don't care what sort of drugs you're using. When you start abusing multiple drugs in doses that are way beyond what medical doctors would ever give to a human being, in any sort of clinical trial, when you start doing multiple drugs at those sort of doses and stacking them with other stuff that's not even supposed to be used in humans and all sorts of stuff, you are playing Russian roulette. You are playing a big game of Russian roulette. And every drug that you throw into the mix that you're abusing adds another bullet to the cylinder. And you do this long enough, and a lot of these guys are doing it, your cylinder is going to come up hot sooner or later. It's a matter of time. So yeah, a lot more of these guys are going to die. And I'm not saying that is a good thing. I'm not gloating. It's a warning to this community saying, get your collective heads out of your asses and wake up to what's going on. That's not gloating. That's saying, look, you dumbasses, stop before the next 20 of you drop dead. That's what it's about. Because I don't want to see this example gets set, and another 500 young kids who go into this with the best of intentions of improving themselves and being the best version of themselves possible, and end up getting involved in this crazy, dangerous, suicidal stuff. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that. You know what? Because a lot of these young kids who are going to get into this probably really are good people. And I don't like to see bad things happen to good people, and I particularly don't like to see self-inflicted harm happen to good people because they made a couple of bad choices. The world could do with a lot less of that. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.